The world will always tell you what you are worth before destiny has the chance to speak. Abigail Carter never forgot those words, even as strangers argued over her future like she was nothing more than another forgotten possession beneath the gray autumn sky. The trading square outside the aging village was crowded with wagons, horses, and merchants preparing for the coming winter, but no one looked at the young Omega with sympathy. Most lowered their eyes, while others whispered that anyone purchased by Iron Fang Pack would never return the same. Abigail stood quietly with her hands folded in front of her worn blue dress, refusing to let fear appear on her face even though her heart trembled with every passing moment. Beside her, her elderly grandmother held her hand one final time. The old woman's fingers were cold, but her voice remained steady. "Listen carefully," she whispered. "No matter what happens, never let anyone see the mark on your left shoulder. Promise me." Abigail nodded without hesitation. She had lived with that mysterious silver crescent her entire life without understanding why her grandmother protected the secret so fiercely. Whenever she had asked about it as a little girl, the answer had always been the same. Some truths must wait until the right eyes find them. Before Abigail could ask another question, a heavy wagon rolled into the square carrying the black banner of Iron Fang Pack. Conversations immediately faded into uneasy silence. Even those who had never seen the fortress spoke of its discipline, its powerful warriors, and the Alpha who ruled with unwavering order. The buyers stepped down from the wagon, examined the gathered workers without cruelty yet without emotion, and quietly completed the transaction. Abigail never cried. She simply embraced her grandmother one last time, holding that fragile moment in her memory as though it might become the only piece of home she would ever have again. As the wagon began moving north, she watched the village slowly disappear behind rolling hills covered in fading golden leaves. Hours passed beneath changing skies until forests replaced open fields and towering stone walls finally emerged in the distance. Iron Fang Fortress stood upon a rocky ridge overlooking endless pine trees, its ancient towers rising toward the clouds with quiet strength rather than menace. Abigail expected shouting, chains, or humiliation when she arrived. Instead, she found remarkable order. Workers crossed the courtyards with purpose. Guards greeted one another with respectful discipline. Children carried baskets through narrow streets inside the fortress walls while elderly healers prepared herbs near sunlit windows. It was not the nightmare the stories had described, yet it was still a place where outsiders rarely belonged. Abigail received simple work clothes, a modest room, and a list of daily responsibilities. No one welcomed her warmly, but no one treated her with needless cruelty either. She quietly accepted every task placed before her, believing that surviving one day at a time would be enough. As evening settled across the fortress, she carried fresh blankets toward the servant quarters. On the stone staircase she noticed a frightened little boy struggling to lift a wooden bucket nearly as large as himself. Without speaking, she gently took one handle while he held the other, and together they carried it safely to the doorway. The child looked up with surprised gratitude before smiling shyly. It was the first genuine smile anyone had offered her since leaving home. Abigail returned the smile without expecting anything in return, unaware that high above the courtyard, hidden behind the window of an ancient tower, a solitary figure had silently witnessed the small act of kindness that would begin changing two destinies forever. Morning arrived beneath a sky covered by pale silver clouds, and Abigail Carter quickly learned that life inside Iron Fang Fortress followed a rhythm as steady as the rising sun. Bells echoed through the stone courtyards before dawn, servants gathered their supplies without unnecessary conversation, and every task seemed guided by quiet discipline instead of fear. She carried fresh water from the central well, swept long corridors polished by countless generations, and helped prepare baskets of bread for the kitchens before the first rays of sunlight reached the highest towers. No one praised her efforts, but no one stood in her way either. She quietly accepted each responsibility with the same patience her grandmother had taught her years before. As the morning continued, Abigail noticed something unexpected. The stories she had heard outside the fortress had painted Iron Fang as a place ruled only by strength, yet she saw elderly craftsmen carefully repairing broken furniture instead of throwing it away, healers tending to tired workers with genuine concern, and experienced guards stopping to help young apprentices carry heavy bundles across the courtyard. The fortress demanded discipline, but beneath that discipline lived an order built upon responsibility rather than cruelty. While delivering folded blankets to the western residents, Abigail heard soft crying behind a stack of wooden crates. She carefully looked around the corner and found the same young boy she had helped the previous evening sitting alone beside a broken toy carved from pine wood. One of its small wheels had come loose. The child quickly wiped away his tears, embarrassed to be seen. Abigail knelt beside him with a gentle smile and examined the toy before noticing a small peg lying nearby. Using nothing more than a piece of cloth and patient hands, she carefully secured the wheel back into place. She handed the toy back without expecting thanks. The little boy's face immediately brightened, and he laughed with quiet relief before running toward his mother. Abigail watched him disappear into the busy courtyard, feeling warmth replace the loneliness she had carried since leaving home. She never noticed the elderly housekeeper observing everything from beneath a nearby archway. Later that afternoon, the housekeeper quietly assigned Abigail additional responsibilities inside the library wing instead of the storage rooms usually given to newcomers. It was not a reward anyone announced aloud, but it was the first silent acknowledgement that someone trusted her careful nature. As sunset approached, the fortress prepared for the arrival of an important royal guest. Servants polished marble floors until they reflected the golden light pouring through towering windows. Fresh banners decorated the great hall, while guards inspected every entrance with calm precision. Conversations remained respectful, yet excitement quietly spread throughout the fortress. Abigail heard whispers that the Alpha King himself would arrive before nightfall, although no one spoke loudly enough for rumor to become certainty. She carried a basket of freshly washed linens toward the upper residence just as several royal riders entered through the massive front gates below. She instinctively stepped aside, lowering her eyes as tradition required. One rider wearing a flowing black cloak slowed his horse for only a brief moment while crossing the courtyard. His piercing blue eyes lifted toward the servants waiting respectfully along the stone pathway, and for the shortest instant his gaze met Abigail's before continuing forward. There was nothing dramatic in the exchange. No words were spoken. No sign revealed that either life had changed. Yet as Abigail resumed walking toward the upper hall, a faint warmth slowly awakened beneath the hidden silver crescent on her left shoulder for the first time since she had entered Iron Fang, while somewhere deep inside the fortress the Alpha King found himself unexpectedly remembering the quiet servant whose kindness seemed impossible to overlook. The following morning began with a gentle snowfall that covered the rooftops of Iron Fang Fortress in quiet white, making the ancient stone walls appear softer beneath the pale winter sky. Abigail Carter adjusted to the rhythm of the fortress a little more each day, discovering comfort in familiar routines that demanded steady hands rather than perfect words. After finishing her morning work inside the kitchens, she carried a basket of clean linens toward the library wing where the elderly archivist who managed the old record struggled to organize stacks of weathered books and fragile scrolls. Without being asked, Abigail carefully placed the basket aside and began helping him lift several heavy volumes onto the higher shelves. The old man looked at her with pleasant surprise before offering a grateful smile. Most people hurry through these halls because they believe old books have nothing left to teach, he said quietly. Abigail returned a gentle smile of her own. My grandmother believed forgotten stories often carry the most important truths. The archivist nodded thoughtfully, almost as though her words reminded him of someone he had known many years before. Together they worked in peaceful silence while beams of soft sunlight slipped through tall stained glass windows, filling the room with warm colors that danced across the ancient stone floor. As Abigail reached for another stack of manuscripts, the edge of one heavy book slipped unexpectedly from the shelf above. She instinctively stepped backward, catching it before it struck the floor, but the sudden movement caused the collar of her simple blue dress to catch against a rough wooden corner. A small tear appeared near her left shoulder before she quickly gathered the fabric with one hand. The movement lasted only a heartbeat, yet it was enough. Standing outside the open library doorway, a passing royal guard happened to glance inside at precisely that moment. Through the narrow opening in the torn fabric he caught sight of what appeared to be a faint silver crescent resting upon her shoulder. The light was so delicate that he questioned whether he had imagined it. Before he could look again, Abigail had already adjusted her collar and continued placing books upon the shelves as though nothing unusual had happened. The guard remained motionless for another moment before quietly continuing down the corridor, carrying an unexpected question in his mind. Later that afternoon, while the fortress prepared for another evening gathering honoring the Alpha King's visit, the same guard respectfully approached one of the senior royal attendants assigned to Damien Blackwood's household. Speaking in a careful voice, he mentioned only what he believed he had seen, making no accusation and offering no conclusion. The attendant listened without interruption before simply nodding once and disappearing into the upper residence where the Alpha King continued studying ancient records brought from the royal archives. Abigail knew nothing about the quiet conversation unfolding above her. She spent the remainder of the afternoon repairing the small tear in her dress with simple needle and thread borrowed from one of the seamstresses. As she carefully stitched the fabric closed beside a sunlit window overlooking the snowy courtyard, she gently touched the hidden mark beneath the cloth without understanding why it felt warmer than ever before. Far above, Damien Blackwood paused while reading an old manuscript as his trusted attendant quietly repeated the guard's observation. The Alpha King closed the weathered book without speaking, his thoughtful expression revealing neither excitement nor disbelief. Instead, he slowly turned toward the frost-covered window overlooking the endless courtyards below, wondering whether the forgotten legend he had spent years chasing had finally stepped into Iron Fang without anyone realizing it. The morning after the quiet report reached the royal residence, Damien Blackwood changed nothing about his routine, and that alone surprised everyone who served him. He attended the council meeting at sunrise, reviewed supply records from neighboring territories, and spent an hour inside the ancient archive studying weathered manuscripts that described forgotten legends older than the kingdom itself. To anyone watching, the Alpha King appeared completely focused on matters of leadership, yet every few pages his attention returned to a single detail repeated throughout the oldest records. The Moon Chosen would never reveal herself through ambition or power. She would be recognized first by compassion, then by the mark hidden beneath silver light. Damien closed the final manuscript and rested one hand upon its faded leather cover. During years of searching, countless families had presented false heirs hoping to gain favor with the crown, but every claim had fallen apart under careful examination. The quiet servant inside Iron Fang Fortress was different because she had never asked to be noticed. She had arrived without titles, without influence, and without even knowing she had become the subject of whispered conversations. Rather than summon her immediately, Damien chose patience. Truth revealed under pressure often became fear, but truth allowed to unfold naturally remained impossible to deny. Throughout the afternoon he walked through the fortress accompanied only by one trusted attendant, greeting craftsmen, instructors, and healers with calm respect. Abigail Carter continued her duties completely unaware that the Alpha King had quietly adjusted his path more than once simply to observe the life unfolding around her. He watched as she paused beside an elderly gardener whose basket of herbs had become too heavy to carry across the icy courtyard. Without hesitation she lifted half the bundle and walked beside him until they reached the greenhouse. Later she noticed a young apprentice struggling to memorize inventory records and patiently explain the numbers until his worried expression relaxed into relief. None of these moments were dramatic enough to attract applause. They disappeared almost as quickly as they happened, yet Damien noticed every one of them. What impressed him was not extraordinary ability but extraordinary consistency. She chose kindness even when no reward followed. As evening approached, preparations began for a small gathering inside the Hall of Ancestors where several relics from the earliest days of the kingdom would be displayed before returning to the royal vault. Abigail received instructions to help arrange candles and fresh linens around the ceremonial tables before the honored guests arrived. She carefully completed each assignment with quiet precision, never realizing that one object resting beneath a velvet covering had remained silent for generations despite being examined by countless scholars and rulers. While adjusting a folded cloth near the center of the hall, she absent-mindedly rested her fingertips against the edge of the ancient stone pedestal to steady herself. For the briefest instant, a soft silver shimmer appeared beneath the velvet covering before disappearing as quickly as it had come. No sound echoed through the chamber. No one gasped. The servants nearby continued working without noticing anything unusual. Only one pair of blue eyes caught the faint reflection from across the hall. Damien stopped walking. His attendant looked toward him in confusion, unable to understand why the Alpha King had suddenly become so still. Damien said nothing. His expression remained composed, yet deep inside he understood that ancient relics did not answer accidents. They answered presence. And for the first time in many years, the impossible no longer felt like a legend waiting inside old books. It was quietly arranging candles only a few yards away, completely unaware that destiny had just taken its first unmistakable breath. That evening the Hall of Ancestors welcomed respected elders, royal advisors, and the senior leaders of Iron Fang Fortress beneath hundreds of softly glowing candles whose light reflected across polished stone like scattered stars. Abigail Carter remained near the outer edge of the chamber with the other attendants, quietly replacing empty lantern oil, arranging ceremonial cloths, and making certain every guest had what they needed before anyone thought to ask. She preferred remaining unnoticed, believing that ordinary work offered the safest place for someone carrying an extraordinary secret. Across the hall, Damien Blackwood greeted each guest with calm dignity while his thoughts repeatedly returned to the faint silver shimmer he had witnessed only hours earlier. Ancient relics did not awaken without reason, and yet he refused to reach conclusions before truth revealed itself completely. When the formal gathering ended, most of the guests slowly departed, leaving only a handful of scholars responsible for returning the oldest artifacts to their protective cases. One elderly historian carefully lifted a weathered silver medallion carved with an elegant crescent moon surrounded by delicate stars. According to generations of royal records, the relic had once belonged to the first moon guardian, yet it had remained silent for centuries despite countless ceremonies performed in its presence. As the historian carried it toward its wooden display case, one of the supporting clasps unexpectedly loosened. The ancient medallion slipped free, falling toward the stone floor below. Abigail reacted without thinking. She stepped forward and gently caught the relic with both hands before it struck the ground. For one silent heartbeat nothing happened. Then the silver surface released a warm, gentle glow unlike anything anyone inside the chamber had ever witnessed. Fine lines hidden within the ancient metal slowly illuminated like moonlight flowing through quiet water. The light remained soft rather than blinding, peaceful rather than dramatic, filling the nearby air with an almost comforting warmth before fading just as gracefully as it had appeared. Every conversation inside the hall came to a complete stop. The elderly historian stared at the relic with wide eyes, struggling to find words that would explain what he had just witnessed. Abigail herself looked equally confused. She carefully examined the medallion, believing perhaps candlelight had reflected across the polished surface in an unusual way. Finding nothing different, she respectfully returned it to the astonished scholar with a quiet apology even though she had done nothing wrong. Damien observed every second without interrupting the silence. His expression remained composed, but deep within his thoughts the final pieces of several ancient passages began fitting together with unsettling clarity. The oldest manuscripts had never described the relic responding to strength, noble birth, or royal authority. They spoke only of harmony, compassion, and the presence of one whose spirit remained untouched by pride. Abigail quietly excused herself and resumed collecting folded linens from the empty tables, completely unaware that every scholar in the chamber had begun exchanging uncertain glances. None of them dared speak openly because none wished to claim that a forgotten legend had awakened before their eyes. Later that night, after the hall had emptied and silence returned to the fortress, Damien entered the royal archive alone. He carefully unlocked a cedar chest that had remained sealed for generations and withdrew a single weathered scroll bearing the oldest royal seal still preserved within the kingdom. As he slowly unrolled the fragile parchment beneath the light of one solitary candle, his blue eyes stopped upon an illustration of a silver crescent resting on the left shoulder of an unknown young woman. The drawing looked remarkably familiar, and for the first time in many years the Alpha King quietly whispered words he had never before believed he would say aloud. Perhaps the prophecy has finally found her. Before dawn painted the eastern mountains with soft shades of silver and blue, Damian Blackwood remained alone inside the royal archive where silence had guarded forgotten truths for centuries. Ancient scrolls covered the massive oak table before him, each one carefully opened beside another until fragments of history slowly formed a single unmistakable picture. One manuscript described the moon chosen as a woman who would bring peace through compassion rather than conquest. Another explained that sacred relics would answer only her presence, awakening without command or ceremony. The oldest scroll of all carried an illustration that matched the report from his trusted guard with unsettling precision. A delicate silver crescent rested upon the left shoulder of a young woman whose identity had never been recorded. Damian slowly closed his eyes, understanding that years of searching had led him not to a royal court or a powerful family but to a quiet servant who never sought attention. Even so, certainty demanded patience. Legends had survived because many people wished to believe them. A true king could not allow hope to replace wisdom. As the fortress awakened to another peaceful morning, Abigail Carter continued her ordinary routine without realizing that her life had already begun changing around her. She carried fresh bread to the kitchen, watered winter herbs growing inside the glass greenhouse, and spent part of the morning helping the elderly archivist return several restored books to their proper shelves. The old man smiled warmly as she carefully dusted one weathered volume before placing it back among countless forgotten histories. "You treat old pages as though they are living friends," he remarked with quiet amusement. Abigail laughed softly. "My grandmother used to say that memories deserve as much kindness as people do." The archivist paused for a thoughtful moment. Before nodding. "Your grandmother must have been a remarkable woman." Abigail lowered her eyes with a gentle smile, silently wishing she could hear that familiar voice one more time. Later that afternoon, while snowflakes drifted lazily beyond the library windows, Damian entered the archive without royal ceremony. Scholars immediately bowed, but he acknowledged them only briefly before walking toward the section where Abigail organized recently restored manuscripts. She noticed his arrival and respectfully stepped aside, keeping her eyes lowered according to tradition. Damian thanked the archivist for preserving the kingdom's oldest records before allowing his attention to settle upon Abigail for only a moment. "I have been told these shelves are more organized than they have been in years," he said calmly. Abigail answered with quiet humility. "Everyone here has been patient enough to teach me. I only followed their example." Damian studied her expression carefully. There was no pride in her voice, no attempt to impress the Alpha King, only sincere gratitude toward those around her. It was the same quiet character he had witnessed again and again throughout the fortress. Before leaving, his gaze briefly settled upon the repaired collar of her blue dress where the hidden mark remained safely concealed. He asked no questions because he wanted her trust to arrive naturally rather than through fear. After he departed, Abigail released a slow breath she had not realized she was holding. She wondered why the Alpha King had seemed more interested in thanking ordinary workers than displaying his authority. That evening, Damian returned to the royal residence carrying only one of the ancient scrolls. Upon its final page appeared a single sentence written in faded silver ink. It declared that when the moon chosen finally appeared, the greatest proof would not be the sacred mark or the awakened relics. The greatest proof would be that every act of kindness she offered before learning her true identity had already begun transforming the hearts of those around her. Damian quietly folded the scroll closed, realizing the prophecy had been unfolding long before anyone recognized its name. The days that followed passed with quiet purpose, yet something invisible had begun changing inside Iron Fang Fortress. No official announcement explained it, and no royal decree demanded it, but the people who crossed paths with Abigail Carter found themselves speaking to her more often than before. The kitchen staff began saving a warm cup of tea for her during the coldest mornings. The elderly gardener insisted she take fresh herbs for her small room because, as he gently claimed, every kind heart deserved the comfort of pleasant fragrance. Even the young apprentices who had once walked past her without notice now greeted her with genuine smiles. Abigail accepted every kindness with humble gratitude, never imagining that her own quiet compassion had inspired each gesture. She still believed she was only an ordinary Omega trying to honor the promise she had made to her grandmother. One snowy afternoon, while organizing old blankets inside a forgotten storage chamber beneath the western tower, Abigail discovered a small cedar box hidden behind several dusty shelves. It was plain except for a faded crescent carved into the lid. Curious, she carefully lifted it and found that it had not been locked. Inside rested a folded piece of linen embroidered with the same elegant silver crescent that marked her own left shoulder. Her breath caught as she gently unfolded the cloth. Wrapped inside it was a small wooden pendant she immediately recognized. It had belonged to her grandmother. She had believed it was lost years ago. Tucked beneath the pendant rested a single handwritten note preserved with remarkable care. Abigail slowly unfolded the aging paper, recognizing her grandmother's graceful handwriting at once. If this message reaches you, it means destiny has already begun opening the path that I could only protect. Never mistake the mark upon your shoulder for a crown. It is a promise. Your strength will never come from ruling others. It will come from reminding them that kindness is stronger than fear. When the one who sees your heart before your mark finally appears, you will know that your journey home has truly begun. Tears quietly gathered in Abigail's eyes, not from sadness but from the overwhelming comfort of hearing her grandmother's voice once more through carefully chosen words. She pressed the letter gently against her heart before folding it with great care and returning everything to the cedar box. At that same hour, Damien Blackwood met privately with the oldest royal historian inside the archive. Together they compared the newest observations with records preserved across countless generations. Every detail continued pointing toward the same conclusion, yet one passage stood apart from all the others. It warned that the moon chosen must never be claimed through royal authority because destiny accepted only willing hearts. Should any ruler attempt to control her future, both the sacred blessing and the ancient covenant would disappear forever. Damien quietly read the warning twice before rolling the scroll closed. His decision became clear. He would protect Abigail from expectation just as carefully as he would protect her from danger. If she truly carried the future described by the ancient records, then her freedom mattered more than any prophecy. As evening settled across the snow-covered fortress, Abigail stepped onto a quiet balcony overlooking the endless forest where pale moonlight shimmered across frozen branches. She gently touched the hidden silver crescent beneath her repaired collar, feeling the familiar warmth return once again. This time it no longer felt mysterious. It felt as though someone, somewhere, had finally begun answering a question her heart had carried since childhood, while only a short distance away the Alpha King looked toward the very same moon, silently promising that when the truth finally revealed itself, it would be through her choice and never his command. The announcement came 3 days later, carried through every courtyard and corridor by the clear sound of the fortress bells. On the night of the coming full moon, Iron Fang Fortress would host the moon blessing, an ancient ceremony observed only when the Alpha King personally visited the stronghold. Servants hurried to polish stone floors, scholars prepared sacred relics for display once again, and gardeners decorated the great hall with evergreen branches that symbolized hope through every season. Abigail Carter accepted her list of responsibilities with the same quiet humility she had shown since arriving at the fortress. She was assigned to help arrange candles surrounding the moon altar before the guests arrived. To her it was simply another task. She had no reason to believe the ceremony held any connection to her own life. Throughout the day she carried baskets of fresh white cloth, carefully replaced worn ribbons with new silver ones, and made certain every lantern was filled before sunset. As she worked, she noticed Damien Blackwood speaking with the fortress elders near the entrance to the ceremonial hall. His calm expression remained thoughtful, yet there was a quiet kindness in the way he listened to every voice before offering his own. Abigail had expected a ruler to command every conversation. Instead, she witnessed a man who earned respect by first showing it to others. Their eyes met briefly as she passed with another basket of candles. Damien offered a polite nod, nothing more. The simple gesture surprised her because it carried neither distance nor superiority. It was the respectful acknowledgement one person offered another. Later that afternoon the senior historian approached the Alpha King with visible concern after reviewing the oldest ceremonial records. In a private conversation he quietly reminded Damien that if the rumors surrounding the mysterious servant proved true, tradition would require the moon chosen to reveal herself before the entire assembly. Damien listened patiently before answering with steady conviction. Tradition cannot stand above dignity. If destiny is real, it has never required fear. No one will be asked to reveal anything against her will. The elderly scholar hesitated before slowly bowing his head, recognizing the wisdom behind those words. News of the Alpha King's decision quietly spread among the senior members of Iron Fang. Some expressed confusion because ancient customs had always placed prophecy above personal choice. Others found unexpected comfort in the king's refusal to force a moment that belonged only to destiny itself. Abigail remained completely unaware of the discussion unfolding around her. As evening approached, she carried the final bundle of ceremonial cloth toward the moon altar where the ancient silver medallion rested upon its carved stone pedestal. She carefully straightened one corner of the altar covering before stepping back to admire the peaceful beauty of the completed hull. Hundreds of candles waited to be lit beneath the vaulted ceiling, their unlit wicks reflecting softly within polished silver ornaments shaped like crescent moons. For reasons she could not explain, standing near the altar filled her with an unfamiliar sense of peace instead of uncertainty. It felt strangely familiar, as though she had dreamed of this place long before seeing it with her own eyes. As the first stars slowly appeared beyond the towering windows, Abigail slipped the folded letter from her grandmother into the pocket hidden inside her dress and quietly reread one final sentence. When the one who sees your heart before your mark finally appears, you will know that your journey home has truly begun. She gently returned the letter to its place, took a slow breath, and looked toward the moon rising above the snowy forest. At that very moment Damien watched the same moon from the opposite side of the fortress, fully prepared to protect her freedom even if it meant walking away from the prophecy itself, because he had come to understand that destiny worthy of trust could only be accepted, never demanded. The night of the moon blessing arrived beneath a sky so clear that every star seemed to rest upon a blanket of endless silver, and the full moon cast its gentle light across Iron Fang Fortress as though it had patiently waited for this very evening. Hundreds of candles illuminated the Hall of Ancestors, their warm glow blending with the pale moonlight pouring through the towering windows until the entire chamber felt timeless. Elders, scholars, craftsmen, servants, and honored guests gathered in respectful silence around the moon altar, while the ancient silver medallion rested peacefully upon its carved stone pedestal. Abigail Carter stood quietly among the attendants wearing a freshly prepared white ceremonial cloak over her simple blue dress, believing she was present only to assist with the final duties before the ceremony concluded. The folded letter from her grandmother remained safely hidden close to her heart, and somehow that small reminder gave her the courage to face the unfamiliar stillness filling the hall. Damien Blackwood stepped forward before the gathered assembly with the calm confidence that had earned the trust of every soul within the fortress. He welcomed those present, spoke of unity, gratitude, and the responsibility every generation carried toward the next, yet he never mentioned prophecy, hidden marks, or ancient legends. When the traditional moment arrived for the elders to invite any sign connected to the forgotten covenant, silence settled across the chamber. Several scholars glanced toward Damien, waiting for him to summon the young servant whose quiet presence had already awakened relics older than memory. Instead, the Alpha King remained exactly where he stood. His voice carried gently through the hall as he said, "No sacred tradition is greater than the freedom of the heart. If destiny is true, it does not require command. It will reveal itself only through willing choice." Those words echoed beneath the vaulted ceiling before fading into complete silence. Abigail felt her heart beating steadily as she remembered every lesson her grandmother had ever taught her. She remembered the promise she had made never to reveal the mark until the right eyes found it. She remembered the letter that told her the one who saw her heart before her secret would mark the beginning of her true journey home. Slowly she lifted one hand to the collar of her white cloak. No one moved. No one spoke. With peaceful confidence rather than fear, Abigail loosened the clasp and gently lowered the fabric from her left shoulder. Beneath the silver light of the full moon, the delicate crescent mark softly shimmered with a quiet radiance that matched the ancient illustration preserved within the royal archives. At that very instant the silver medallion upon the moon altar awakened once more, releasing a warm glow that spread gently throughout the hall without sound or force, illuminating every carved crescent, every ancient symbol, and every hopeful face gathered within the chamber. The elders bowed their heads in silent wonder. The scholars closed their eyes as generations of unanswered questions finally found their answer. Damien looked at Abigail not with triumph, but with profound respect. Then, before the entire assembly, the Alpha King slowly bowed his head to the young Omega who had entered Iron Fang believing she possessed nothing of value. The gesture transformed the room more deeply than any miracle. In that single moment every person present understood that true greatness was measured not by power, noble birth, or ancient prophecy, but by humility, compassion, and the courage to remain kind when the world expected bitterness. Abigail smiled through grateful tears as the warmth surrounding her shoulder gently faded into peaceful stillness. She realized that nothing precious had been taken from her when she was sold away from home because the one gift that truly mattered had always lived within her own heart. As soft snow began falling beyond the great windows, Iron Fang Fortress welcomed not the rise of a ruler shaped by destiny alone, but the beginning of a future built upon dignity freely chosen, hope quietly shared, and the enduring truth that the strongest hearts are always the gentlest.